And we're live.
Is it live or is it Memorex? Good evening, Ericka.
Hello, Robert. How are you?
Nice to be back. I take a couple weeks off. Got a few bionic parts put in me.
Nice.
All I want for Christmas is a new left knee. So we're sort of working that through.
Okay.
We're
Hopefully no Neuralink, so that you turn into one of these robots. An Elon Musk robot. It's not like a Tesla knee, is it?
No. But speaking of robots, it's a great segue into the fact that once again, we're asked to trust the federal government, this time on the drones, right? Nice segue, don't you think?
Oh, I love it. Perfect.
So it makes me feel a lot better that my government basically is saying that, well, we've investigated it and just trust us. All these car-sized drones that you see flying over New Jersey, and I'm from New Jersey, of course, originally, there's nothing to worry about. I believe, what did they say? There's no evidence that the drones are anomalous or a threat to national security or public safety. Well, that makes me feel better.
Right.
What about you?
I all I know is that when the federal government tells me that I'm safe and secure, I just always feel so warm and cozy inside. I'm like, everything will be just fine. Oh my God, who believes that crap? Then if you know that they're not nefarious, bro, then tell us what they are there for.
Well, the interesting thing is the Biden administration initially came out with a statement that said, they're safe. Don't worry that when they're not flying over any military establishments, only to have to walk that back because apparently in both New Jersey and Ohio, they have been. Now, I don't know who's behind the drones, but isn't this regulated by the FAA?
Yes.
Aren't all drones supposed to be registered? So why can't they find out? I mean, I'm all for shooting them down, and I understand that you're legally not allowed to do that. So I'm not advocating for someone to do that. But if it were me, but if it's regulated by the FAA, I don't understand why we don't know more about it, unless, of course, hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. You just trust us and don't worry about it. It's not a threat. So in any event,
and that's Robert, we do video production. We have drone operators. You have to have licenses. You have to get permission to have them up in the air. We're told that if you have drones illegally in the air, you can get them shot down. You can go to jail, all kinds of crazy crap. So if you want me to believe these are just some jokers having fun, I've got a bridge to sell you.
Well, all I can tell you, because obviously from New Jersey, live in New Hampshire. If this were over New Hampshire, there'd be a few down already. I can just tell you, live free or die is a real thing. But in any event, we have a very special guest, Dr. James Carafano from Heritage Foundation coming up. Let's roll the monologue, and really looking forward to speaking to him a few minutes right into the show. Let's roll him. Hello, and welcome to Of the People. I am back. And the war on religion continues. America today is painfully aware of the shooting at the Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin yesterday. And our hearts go out to the families of the deceased and those that were injured, and just the senseless loss of life up there. True to form, the Democrats and the media have instantly rolled out their talking points. Get your gun. It's about gun control and gun violence. And the truth of the matter is, gun violence isn't really what they want you to believe it is. Gun violence usually breaks down into two areas. The first one is ideology or war on religion. And the second is usually mental health. And there's no question that there is a continued war on religion in this country, affecting both Christians and Jews. The shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the First Baptist Church in Sutherland, Texas, the Burnett Chapel in Nashville, the mass shooting at the kosher grocery store in Jersey City, the Passover shooting at the Chabad in Poway, right? And let's not forget the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina at that church over the years. And that's just to name a few. There's an incredible rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Christian bigotry in this country. But it's also about mental health. Which is, for some reason, seems even harder for people to acknowledge as a driving issue, as a root cause for the shootings that we are seeing. Whether it's the breakup of the family, whether it's the isolationism, whether it's the loss of faith, whether it's the loss of belongingness, drug abuse, other factors we could talk about. Mental health is another driving force in all of this. The shooting at Appalachian High School outside of Atlanta, the Old National Bank in Louisville, where the shooter actually streamed live the shooting in Florence, Kentucky a couple years ago. Let's not forget Austin, Texas as well. We have created a culture, ladies and gentlemen, where violence in the name of politics, or more accurately, ideology, is permissible. And let's not forget recently, not one, but 2 assassination attempts on President Trump during the election cycle. Ladies and gentlemen, a gun is not good or bad. A gun is an inanimate object. What you do with it makes it good or bad. And it's just that simple. It is beyond naive and dangerous to think that if you take away everyone's guns, that you would solve the problem and take away the problem. Bad people will get guns. Those are the facts. And if by some fantasy or fairy tale, the government was able to get all your guns or our guns and firearms, they would find other weapons or toxins or poison which inflict harm or cause fatality, because it's not about the tool. It is about the person. And let's not forget that the right to bear arms in this country is sacrosanct. There's a reason it is the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights, buttressed up against the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the essential freedoms of democracy. The Second Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, is there to protect our rights on the First Amendment. As for yesterday's shooting and tragic shooting in Madison, I don't know the real motive behind it. And hopefully through the investigation, we will all find out the real motives. And hopefully that the police investigation is transparent, because too often we don't get the answers and the information is withheld. And that hopefully that the families of those that were killed and injured find some solace in that information when it's out there. But we also hope and pray that in this country, we start to have an honest conversation about the root cause of these kinds of shootings and the anti-religious bigotry and hatred, unfortunately, by part of this country against a large part, if not majority of this country, those of us who, quote unquote, cling to our guns and religion, as well as the factors that contribute to the mental health crisis that clearly exist in this country that nobody wants to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not about the guns. As Shakespeare said, look not to the stars, but rather to ourselves, both as part of the problem and hopefully as part of the solution. And that's the monologue. Ericka, come on back in.
Hello.
Hello. I am honestly thrilled to have with us our guest tonight.
Yes.
Right? Dr. James Carafano, author, historian, national security, foreign policy expert, cybersecurity, Army veteran. I could go on. The list is long. Dr. Carafano, thank you so much for making the time and joining us on Of the People. Welcome.
It's great to be with you. Look, just listening to the monologue and seeing the montage there, I mean, you had me at the nuclear explosion. So I am all in for this.
Fantastic.
The question is, do you know where we poached the nuclear explosion from?
No, but there's not that many, so it's not.
It was the Barry Goldwater ad, the daisy chain Barry Goldwater ad in 1964.
In your heart, you know he's right.
How am I doing?
Good. So far.
Welcome to the show. And before we get started, both Eric and I wanted to extend a personal thanks to you and to Heritage for being such an early sponsor and large part of our Israel Appreciation Day event that we had a couple months ago in Las Vegas. Part of it was Heritage's early support that made everything else roll from there. So we did want to say thank you, because as goes Israel, so goes the rest of the Western world.
So I gotta tell you, so my colleague, Victoria Coates, who just came out with this fantastic book about Israel policy, and they just had a book book event for her at Heritage with our president, Kevin Roberts, and Senator Ted Cruz. They wanted to borrow the U.S.-Israel thing for the book event. And so it's prominently displayed there.
Oh, cool.
So you guys are getting some love tonight.
Fantastic.
I have one behind me.
I know. So it made me think of that. So it's prominently, so they got all their books out there and it's prominently featured there and everything. There you go.
That's fantastic.
I love to hear that. Thank you so much. Just to jump, because I know your time is short with us. The whole situation with the drones and the cyber warfare. I know. What are the questions we should be asking? I mean, we're getting obviously not a lot of information from the federal government. And I guess the question really is, because as I said in the opening, or the kibitzing as we call it, I thought drones were regulated by the FAA. And I'm not even sure we understand the right questions to ask. Maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. Look, so I get asked a lot about the drones, right? And one of the things I've been in the national security business for a really long time. I've been at Heritage for 22 years. And one of my rules is I don't ever guess. And if I don't know, I say, I don't know. And look, I'm not in the intelligence community. And so I basically have the same information as every other American. So when I get asked this question, what are these things? My answer is, I do not know. But here's what I do know. If you want to go back and Google, I wrote papers on this, 10, 12 years ago, and talked about the future of drones in the United States. And I covered both sides. On the one side, I said, people do not understand the incredible potential that using drones has for the economy, for innovation, for all. It's infinite. And we should be doing everything we can to make America a leader in this space. On the other side, I said, look, you can also use these things for adversarial purposes, and we should get ahead of the power curve and figure out how we're going to address that as well. So I don't know what this is, but here's what I can tell you with a lot of authority as somebody who has, worked with and followed the Department of Homeland Security and everything else for a long time. We have spent the last 4 years, surveying school board meetings, providing concierge service to illegal aliens, persecuting Christians who are thinking the wrong thoughts in public. We have done everything with the systems that we built post 9/11 to protect the American people, except use them for the purpose of protecting the American people.
Wow.
So here we have a case of an emerging threat where the need was obvious. Okay, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, you wouldn't see that, but certainly in the last 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, with the swarming drones and all that.
Absolutely, totally obvious, right?
Yeah.
And what's more, the technology, the capability to address this and ensure the sovereignty of our airspace, whether it's a bomber flying over from Russia or a Chinese surveillance balloon or a drone, is available. And what have we done the last 4 years? We've used the system that was designed to protect us for everything else
against ourselves.
But that.
Yeah.
That I know for a fact.
And I just so everybody knows, I went over to the Heritage Foundation, and sure enough, look at 2013, like you were talking about this. You literally were talking about this 10 years ago.
We've literally been advocates, for example, for, most of the drones used in U.S. airspace are built in China. We know for an absolute fact that all of those drones are subject to being exploited by the Chinese. We've done nothing about that. And we called for banning the use of Chinese drones in the United States. People ignored it. Here's what I'll tell you. I don't know what this is, but I'll tell you what it really is.
Yeah.
It's a blessing from God. This is
okay. You need to explain. You need to explain this to me.
Say more,
this
doctor.
This is a warning to the American people. It is going to happen. If we just sit back and do what we're doing now, someday Americans are going to die adversarial use of drones in the United States.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
People don't know about the swarming drones. Like, they don't know that that's a thing. And I'm like, it is not science fiction, y'all. This is not movies. This is real life. We've
actually had in the United States somebody prosecuted for planning to fly a drone into a electrical power station to do a blackout. That's already happened in the United States. That was thwarted. But, it's like, you remember the bombing of the World Trade Center?
Yeah,
of course.
Van in the basement. Everybody said, well, look at those yahoos, right? Yeah. That was God telling us, get serious about these things.
It's coming.
Nothing, and we got 9/11.
Wow.
It's interesting, though, about the drones. Okay. It reminds me that back in 2019, the Inspector General put out a report about COTS, right? Commercially off-the-shelf software
right.
from China that was whether it was Lenovo, whether it was GoPro, whatever it was that was vulnerable for whether it was spying or stealing data or those kinds of things. I mean, which of course some of the states acted on, mostly the Republican states, to be candid. Governor Abbott in Texas acted on it. Governor DeSantis in Florida acted on it. I don't remember if Kentucky did, but there were some that did. But the federal government, did not really do anything about it. And now you have these drones, and I'm sorry, the whole made in China thing should be a red flag to begin with. And then I look at what Israel has been able to do using drones in military capacity to defend itself. And when it doesn't take a rocket scientist, Dr. Carafano, to figure out that if we don't have control of our airspace.
Yeah, I don't know if you watched The Lioness, which is actually a pretty good TV
show. It's so good.
But you see, I mean, in the last season, the cartels were dive bombing the border patrol with weaponized drones, and we know the cartels have already used drones for surveillance. We know they have the capacity to weaponize these things. It's like giving the kids matches and telling them to go play in the garage and then be in shock when the garage burns down.
Okay, so this has been one of my theories, is that they're being used for drug trafficking. That there's some kind of trafficking, they're being used for something. Because if the government is, this is my where's my tinfoil hat? This is my theory.
Tinfoil hat on.
So if the government is allowing this to continue to happen, and they're not shooting them down, and they're not a real threat to society or whatever, then that makes sense that it would be trafficking or something like that.
So here's what we know. We know that the cartels have already used drones and ultralights. Those little airplanes that basically
the gliders. The gliders.
Yeah. It's basically a glider with a lawnmower, propeller on it, right?
With propeller that you wind the propeller to get the rubber band tight, and then you glide it in.
So we already know that the cartels have, because they try everything, right, to see how they can move stuff around.
Yeah.
It's not impossible that that's true. So the problem is we can all have theories, but the point is if we can have theories, bad people can have theories, and they're not stupid. They're thinking of the same things we are, and it's just someday somebody's going to do this stuff unless you give them a good reason not to. So I really worry about this. It is just too obvious an avenue to do all kinds of exploitative things inside the United States.
Well, and we've got millions of illegal immigrants, many of which we know are criminal aliens. We've got known, Chinese freaking police stations that have been busted. We have no idea who is in this country, and they could do all kinds of nonsense.
Well, thank you for bringing that. That's a really important point. We kind of, it's like bell bottoms, right? We go through fads here. So, counterterrorism was this big thing and then, Obama came in and told us that was all done with, right? And so in the last couple of years, it's been all Iran, all China, all Russia. But the reality is I think terrorism is coming back on the agenda for a couple of reasons. One is we have this global intifada, which is like a poison. And so inspiring, I mean, it is, yahoos all over the world to do something, encouraging Islamist guys to take another whack at coming at the United States.
Yeah.
We have a wide open border. We have adversarial powers who have lots of influence in Latin America. Lots of people have lots of opportunity to say bad things here. We have new places popping up with bad people. One of the things that Trump did is he named Sebastian Gorka, who's an old friend of mine, as the head of counterterrorism at the National Security Council in the Trump administration. I take that as a positive sign. Seb is a real CT expert, takes it really seriously. And the fact that he was an early name by the president, and that's a prominent position in the NSC, leads me to believe that the incoming administration gets this. But I tell people this after 4 years of Biden and decades of investment post 9/11 in homeland security and counterterrorism and everything else. After 4 years of Joe Biden, you are less safe today than you were on September 10th, 2001.
Can I? Okay, sorry, Robert. One quick question,
okay.
And I don't know if this is a silly question, so forgive me if this is a silly question. But I'm just thinking about when we hear that the drones are primarily made in China and they're susceptible to being hacked or whatever, or, spied on. We've got Lenovo. You've got all of these products that we know are being shipped in. Isn't this an appropriate use of the tariff to really deter Americans from going toward the cheaper alternatives?
Yeah, that's not what tariffs are for.
Okay.
This is a national security matter. If there's if there's a legitimate national security concern, just be banned outright.
Just ban it all the way around.
TikTok.
Okay.
And honestly, unless President Trump actively does something to prevent this, by the time he comes into office, the TikTok app will be gone, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And not only should he let that ban stand, we should start going after. I'll give you another example, which is pretty egregious. All these big cranes that move cargo on the U.S. piers, pick up these shipping containers, built in China. All of them can be used for surveillance by the Chinese. Wow. And if the Chinese just want to shut them off, they can figure out how to do that. So
wow,
the vulnerabilities that we have created are just massive. We should start with the stuff that we know. Okay, known threats and the things that we know that are strategically important. But the reality is there is almost nothing that the Chinese provide which has a connection to the internet and is electronic, which isn't potentially used as a spy vehicle. A lot of people have these little picture frames, and you upload your family photos. Yeah. Right. All made in China. All can be hacked by the Chinese.
Oh my God. I can't. I had a whole argument with a friend of mine the other day who's like borderline anarcho-capitalist, and he's like, oh, the tariffs and this and the cheap goods and poor people and blah 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 blah, all the things you hear. And I was like, bro, are you legitimately trying to say we're better off with all of the cheap crap that's spying on us, is toxic and whatever, while we allow them to freaking have a hot war, cold war, poisoning American citizens with fentanyl? Like, we're not better for this relationship.
Well, on top of which, obviously, we are dependent on China for so many fundamental things, whether it's medicine. We've outsourced so much that we are vulnerable to China cutting off the minerals we need or the medicine we need. I mean, China has also bought up land in this country. China is also, I think they bought Smithfield Foods, which is the largest pork producer in the country. So, I was going to, Dr. Carafano, I was actually going to jump to Israel and Iran, but China was also on my list. So let's stay with China for a second, because to me, China is the man behind the curtain, right? To use a Wizard of Oz analogy or reference, right? The man behind the curtain, because we've argued on this show for a long time that part of the problem is certainly within the Biden administration's 4 years, which we've argued here is really just nothing more than a third term of Obama anyway, so to speak. That's the conspiracy theorist in us. But that China has been at war with us, and part of the problem is we have not acknowledged that. It's a Cold War, whether it's the Belt and Road initiatives in the Southern Hemisphere or the things that, the things that they've done to encircle us economically or militarily. So my question to you in all of this is, with the incoming Trump administration, and I'm not asking you to speak for Heritage, I'm asking you to speak as Dr. Carafano, which is what would your 2 or 3 policy recommendations be to try to check or neutralize China in the first 100 days?
Ban everything. No.
Well, let me just talk generally, because I spend a lot of time in Europe and Latin America and other places, and we all talk about China, and we've all kind of got to get on the same sheet of music. And so what I tell everybody is we all ought to at least adhere to the basics. And so the basics are the 4 no's. One is no strategic dependencies on China. I mean, actually, our friends, the Israelis, are a good example. The Israelis went all in for China. Like a lot of people, they say, oh, it's just a checkbook. And now they've seen literally being stabbed in the back by the Chinese, that the Chinese are not a benevolent and they're not a manageable relationship. They're out for China, and they will stab you in the back if they can. So nobody should have a strategic dependency on China. If you would all value your sovereignty, your independence, your prosperity, and your freedom. Obviously, no military cooperation with China. We're not going to have treaties that they honor. We're not going to have non-proliferation agreements. We can't trust them at all. You have to treat them as a military adversary and not as somebody that you could ameliorate with just by engaging.
Yep.
No ignoring China's human rights record. And I mean, this is ridiculous that the Chinese get a pass. The Chinese have committed a genocide. So people are happy to go out and demonize. I was actually just talking to a Uyghur who got his grandmother out of China, who was held captive there for decades. People are willing to give China a pass on an actually verified genocide while they attack and demonize Israel. It makes no sense. And then no ignoring all the Chinese, whether it's malicious activity, whether it's corruption, bribery, intellectual property theft, fentanyl trafficking. You cannot ignore these things. And if we just all agreed to the 4 no's, we'd be in a big stop. The other thing I'll say is, if China's going to be stopped as a military power, only going to be done by the United States. And we have to start in the Indo-Pacific. We have to be able to have a strong conventional deterrent to the Chinese in the Indo-Pacific. And a lot of people talk about a pivot to Asia. You cannot pivot to Asia and abandon the other critical theaters of the United States. Like we can abandon Europe or abandon the Middle East and just, first of all, we don't have anything to pivot with. 70% of the U.S. Navy is already in Asia. If we took the other 30%, we'd do nothing. So we can't pivot the Navy because the Navy's already there. 90% of the U.S. Army is permanently stationed in the United States. We don't have a big enough army to pre-position major forces anyway. We don't really have large forces in South Korea anymore. We don't really have large forces in Europe. So we have most of the U.S. Army in the United States so we can flex in any direction. You don't pivot the Air Force because we're the only country in the world that has an Air Force that deploys globally. So it doesn't matter where our Air Force is positioned. It goes anywhere. It's actually good to have it dispersed. And you really can't pivot the Space Force because they're in space. So there is no real military pivot to be had, as much as people that wave their arms and talk about that. The only way we're going to be able to build up more capacity and capability in the Pacific theater to ensure conventional deterrence and really put the Chinese back in their place is if the European front and the Middle East front are stable. The European front is largely the Europeans have
which frees up resources.
But the Middle East, that's back on the U.S. We have to put Iran back in the box with Israel, and those are the things that literally have to be done in the next 5 years.
So let me ask you a question though, because obviously it's been reported that the Chinese now have a larger naval fleet than we do. How much of a concern should that be in real terms?
Well, quantity has a quality all its own. It's great to have the best. I mean, their aircraft carrier cannot match our aircraft carrier, but we only have 10 of them or whatever, and you sink one, it doesn't get replaced.
Yeah.
And the world's best ship or plane can only be in one place at a time. So the fact that they have large numbers, even though operationally they probably aren't a match for the United States, it's pretty significant. So we need a much bigger maritime presence in the Pacific. And we're only going to do that by stabilizing other theaters so the needs aren't as great, and also increasing our military capability, which is, I'm a big fan of this. I'm a big fan of this DOGE idea and everything else, because every military buildup that we've ever done in the U.S. was done with deficit spending. The one thing the United States cannot afford to do now, more deficit spending. So if we're going to build up anything in the U.S., and our military ought to be one of them, we're only going to do that by, one, be more efficient with our military spending, but two, stop spending on stupid stuff.
Yeah.
So I think hopefully the pressure and the strategy of the Musk and Vivek will bring some of that reality to the country. I'm an optimist, one, because we can't really defend the country without a sound fiscal policy.
Right.
Two is because I think they're so prominent a voice. Three, because the president is behind this. But four, and then I think this is really important, I think we're going to have some pretty good discipline among Republicans in the House and the Senate to really drive.
I hope so.
I hope so. I feel good about that.
Look. The first thing I'll tell you, and we've both been around long enough. I probably don't go back as far as you, but pretty close. Is that personnel is policy?
22 years old. No.
From your mouth to God's
All
ears.
three
Me
of
too.
us.
I'm getting my parts replaced bionically, so I feel.
I have shirts older than 22.
Exactly.
Same.
The personnel is policy. We all know that. And when you looked at the Biden administration and you saw the personnel, it sort of explains the policy. And when I look at the incoming Trump administration, I am heartened, by that. So with your military background, with your national security background, is there a concern for you with the DEI or wokeness of our military, which I think over time has sort of hurt our battle readiness? Because look, I didn't like when they, I'm a student of history, perhaps not a historian as you are, but it used to be the War Department. Then we went to the Defense Department, right? I mean, and defense is different than waging wars to win. And now we have this whole wokeness in the Army. I'm concerned has hurt our ability to be ready for battle.
I think it's a true statement. I think it has. I think it's had a serious corrosive effect on our armed forces the last couple of years. I think that this is a curable disease. I think when this administration jumps in there and puts an end to this stuff, it'll be gone. It'll die very quickly. And I think the men and women in uniform absolutely want to get back to. I'll give you an example. Remember a couple of years ago how every NFL team had to bend the knee, right?
Right.
And
that's when I stopped watching.
Right. Well, if you were watching football today, nobody does that anymore. It's like, okay, we're not doing that anymore. Everybody's okay, fine. Oh, you mean we can just play football? Awesome. Right.
Yeah. And now they're doing the Trump dance in the end zone.
That's right. They'll all be doing the Trump dance in the military. Hopefully not in combat, because that would not be healthy. But actually, I know a lot of guys in the military, and girls, and most of these people you do not want to see dance. So.
That's not what I'm looking for them to do. I can tell you.
Oh, yeah,
which is probably a good thing.
Punch people. Yep.
Absolutely. So because I know that I'm getting a cue for station break from our producer, but I also know that you have a little more time. I desperately want to talk to you a little bit about Iran and Israel. Can you stay with us on the other side of the break for a couple of minutes?
You bet.
All
It's
right.
either that or wash the dishes. So yeah.
Yes.
Let's go with
Yeah,
that.
washing the dishes. I
yeah, no,
love it.
we'll take first over washing the dishes. So
Yeah.
I got
Let's
it.
do that.
Ericka, let's roll a quick break. I want to come back to Dr. Carafano.
Oh.